computer tomography scanning, known as CT or CAT scanning, explores inside a human body and is a life-saving tool for diagnosing disease. But in this case, the patient is dead.
In fact, dead for 5,000 years. But hopefully the CT scan will tell us why he died and what conditions may have led to his death.
This mummy from the Michael C. Carlos Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, is examined without being unwrapped to uncover the secrets inside.
Looks like there's some tissue there.
Wow. Oh, that's really interesting.
CT scanning is based on the X-ray principle. As X-rays pass through the body, they're absorbed at differing levels, creating a flat image on film. In the case of the CT, the X-rays are fired from various angles around the subject to create a cross-section, or slice. As the patient moves through the scanner, up to 1,500 slices are produced and stacked together, like a deck of cards, to form a comprehensive picture of the body.
Technology has really revolutionized both the study of mummies and dealing with them in museums, because it helps us not only understand how they were made, but it helps us preserve them for future generations.
Across the country at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum in San Jose, California, a curiously tiny mummy has been on display for more than 75 years.
The mystery of this small mummy is a story of who this was, how this person lived, and how this person died. And given that this is a small mummy, the assumption was a child.
To unlock the mystery beneath the bandages, Dr. Amy Ladd, along with a team of scanning and computer experts, performed one of the most sophisticated high-tech medical exams ever carried out on an Egyptian mummy.
This technology is fascinating. It's like doing a virtual autopsy without touching the mummy at all.
The type of scanner used on a mummy is called a C-arm. It's a movable arm that completely encircles the subject. The C-arm produces an astounding 60,000 image slices, which deliver details rarely before seen in a mummy scan.
This is breakthrough technology. Humans cannot even go through the scanner right now. It's that new.
The thousands of images from the scanner were then fed into a supercomputer to create a virtual three-dimensional image inside the mummy.
It's a fantastic thing because it's preserved in its original state. And as we found out, it is preserved so well that we can see details as if it were a child ever seeing in the clinic today.
With these astounding images, Dr. Ladd was able to solve the mystery of the tiny mummy. First, by examining the 3,000-year-old teeth.
This is the mummy scan of the jaw. This is from the side. You see the lower jaw, baby teeth, which are already in place, and the teeth that haven't come in yet, that are beginning to form, including the 6-year molars. This tells us the age because there's baby teeth still in place, so we know it's a young child, hasn't lost any teeth. The 6-year molars haven't come in yet, which tells us that this child is younger than 6.
Details from under the wrappings also revealed clues about the sex of the child.
So this image of the mummy skull, the child's skull, we know it's a girl because on the skull there is a wavy pattern, which is the preservation of the child's hair. And at that time, a girl had hair and a boy had his head shaved. We also know it's a girl because there is no mummified genitalia between the legs, which by default, that's a girl and not a boy.
The scanning images were even able to tell the story of how the little girl may have died.
There's a suggestion of there's some scalloping out, these kind of grayish areas, which possibly means there was increased intracranial pressure, meaning this child may have had a virus or a bacteria infection causing swelling in the brain, which may have been the cause of death. So it was really a tragedy. Here was this healthy child, probably running around until just a few weeks before her death. And what an abrupt ending. This is a kid who had a whole life to live, which wasn't, and it's preserved in time, and that's been a wonderful experience unraveling that mystery.
Our high tech may help us understand the past, But how did the Egyptians use their technology to accomplish some of the most amazing body preservation the world has ever known?
The Egyptians were the techies of their day. They had skills that nobody else had.
Dr. Robert Breyer, a renowned Egyptologist, is considered by many to be the world's foremost expert on mummies and the mummification process. In fact,
people sometimes call me Mr. Mummy. I never call myself that. But I think it's that they're surprised that there's anybody who would work with just mummies.
Dr. Breyer is so fascinated by mummies, he wanted to accomplish what no one else had in thousands of years. In 1994, he performed and documented an actual body mummification, using the same process as the ancient Egyptians.
I decided to mummify a human cadaver because I wanted to know exactly how the Egyptians mummified their dead.
Without the use of modern medical technology, Dr. Breyer set out to mummify a body using the exact tools available to the Egyptians millennia ago.
In order to do the project, we had to replicate Egyptian tools. Now, they had knives made out of bronze and copper, but they also had obsidian, which is volcanic glass, and that's very sharp, even sharper than surgical scalpels. So they used that for incisions too.
Using a cadaver donated to science, Dr. Breyer began his first step in the Egyptian mummification process, removing the internal organs, which are prone to rapid decay.
In order to preserve a body, you have to make sure that bacteria don't act on it. Bacteria is what causes decay. They act on the soft tissue. And the reason they go to the soft tissue is there's water there. So the key is dehydrate quickly, get rid of the moisture so the bacteria won't decay your body. Now this tool was really important. They removed the internal organs through a tiny incision, only 3.5 inches wide. So you can't get your full hands, you can't get 2 hands in. So this tool, when you've got your incision made, you can put it in the incision and kind of pull the organs out.
The Egyptians made such small incisions because they wanted to cause bodies as little damage as possible. Ancient embalmers removed all the internal organs, from the stomach and lungs to the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. The only organ left was the heart.
They left the heart in place because they believed you thought with your heart. They didn't realize you thought with your brain. So they left the heart in place because you're going to need that to do your thinking when you get to the next world.
Once the organs were removed, the Egyptians stored them and buried them with the mummy in containers called canopic jars.
It's really a jar. It's got a lid. It's hollow inside. And the lid is in the shape of a god who protects the internal organs. And the ancient Egyptians put the internal organs inside for protection.
The early morticians didn't preserve the brain because they thought it was responsible for producing mucus. So to keep skull damage to a minimum, they removed the brain through the nose.
Undoubtedly, the hardest thing for the Egyptians to do was remove the brain. Now, this was done by a skilled surgeon, somebody who really knew what he was doing.
The surgeon opened a pathway to the brain by breaking through the ethmoid bone in the back of the nasal cavity.
And then they used something like this. I mean, it looks like a coat hanger. And what they did was they inserted it through the nasal passages into the cranium. The brain doesn't stick to the tool. It's almost too liquid. So what we realized is that the way the Egyptians did it was they indeed put the long coat hanger-like instrument through the nose. But then once it's in the cranium, in the brain, you use it like a kitchen whisk almost. We rotate it around and around and around, breaking down the brain, liquefying it. Then you turn the cadaver upside down, and the brain runs out through the nose like a liquid. That's how the Egyptians did it.
The ancient embalmers removed moisture from inside the body by inserting pouches of a sodium carbonate compound called natron.
This is natron. It's exactly like the natron the ancient Egyptian embalmers used 2,000 years ago. Natron is basically a salt, and the way it dehydrates is like any salt. It's hygroscopic. It pulls the water out of the body, bonds with it, and the body becomes dehydrated.
Then, Dr. Breyer copied the Egyptian practice of covering the outside of the body with natron and leaving it to dry in the heat for 35 days. The result? A dried out but recognizable body. This, in essence, is what a mummy would have looked like thousands of years ago, before the final and most recognizable step in mummification, wrapping the deceased in linen. Lots of linen.
And wrapping was a ritual. They wrapped each finger individually, the hands, the legs. There are magical spells on the bandages. As this is going on, priests are chanting prayers, so there's a ritual that's going on parallel to the physical process.
Over 20 pounds of linen wrappings were used during a typical Egyptian mummification.
If you were wealthy enough, as you were being wrapped, within the layers of wrappings, they would place magical amulets. Now, an amulet is anything that's small that can be worn for protection. So, in the bandages, you could have as many as 100 amulets. This is an ancient amulet from a mummy. It's 3,000 years old. And if you look at it closely, you can see that it's carved like a beetle. And on the bottom is the payoff. There are two little holes. That's where it was sewn onto the mummy to protect it forever. It was in the wrappings.
The wrappings were coated with resin made from tree sap. The resin hardened into a black tar-like substance, which ensured the wrappings stayed in place. The word mummy comes from the Arabic word mumia, which means black tar. The entire process took the Egyptians up to 70 days to complete. For these modern-day mummifiers, it was an education in a long-lost ancient art.
I think the Mummy Project was really important. It was the first time in 2,000 years that anyone had conducted an Egyptian mummification. And for the first time, we know the details now of how they did it. So I think it was really important.
Although the process was over for Dr. Breyer, the ancients still had much to do to protect the mummy for eternity. In addition to the wrappings, the Egyptians used a papier-mâché-like material called a cartonnage to cover the head and feet of the mummy. Then the body was placed in a wooden coffin. And finally, if the deceased had been wealthy or a pharaoh, the mummy was sealed in a stone or granite sarcophagus.
So it's kind of like a whole set of luggage that fits one inside the other. You've got all of these different layers of protection, all for eternity.
Although mummification was a complicated, time-consuming task, it was only the start of a burial ritual. The Egyptians honored the dead by constructing enormous tombs and temples, which became wonders of the world. Egypt is the only country in the world where the process of preserving a body became an art form. The Egyptians began to develop their skills before 3000 BC.
Mummification actually was discovered sort of by accident by the ancient Egyptians. This is such a hot, dry climate. The sand is virtually an oven. They buried people in graves in the ground and then discovered that these bodies were pretty much preserved, almost like dried fish. And they realized that nature could do this, and then began to develop technologies and a pretty sophisticated science to be able to sort of artificially do the same thing.
As it evolved over the centuries, mummification grew into a vast industry.
When it came to mummification, the Egyptians were way ahead of everybody in the Near East. Nobody could do it like they did. They also had the resources. They were a wealthy country that had conquered the Near East, so it takes a lot of money to do this. And they had the money to do it, so they could indulge themselves and really perfect the art form.
The Egyptians utilized their technology and resources not only for mummification, but also to build enormous tombs. A vast complex of these tombs is known as an acropolis, or city of the dead.
The design and technology to make the tombs was pretty sophisticated and pretty demanding. They were working with bronze tools, hewing out square chambers in the rock, sometimes hundreds of yards deep into the limestone. And typically, a pharaoh had this team working for 40 years to prepare his tomb. That's a remarkable feat of skill and engineering, considering what they had at their disposal.
The Great Pyramid of Khufu, one of the 7 wonders of the world, is a tomb constructed utilizing this organization and building technology.
It is still the single largest masonry building ever constructed. And all of that was done to house, in the center, a little tiny burial chamber with the pharaoh's mummy inside.
The Egyptians believed that a dead person's soul left the body, but would rejoin it at burial. So the deceased needed his body and worldly possessions for the afterlife. The basic design for most Egyptian tombs included 3 essential compartments: the entrance, the offering chamber, and the burial chamber.
This is a typical entrance to an ancient Egyptian tomb. These hieroglyphs would tell you who was buried in this tomb, would also present a welcome and a curse. The curse or the warning in the hieroglyph says, if you come with bad intentions, depart now before it is too late. But we have good intentions, so let's go inside.
Tomb builders carved a tunnel that connected the entrance to the first room inside, the offering chamber.
A door like this would have been found in an ancient tomb. The relatives of the deceased person would leave offerings here at the bottom of the door, and the deceased person's soul would magically enter here and take the food or other offerings to the afterlife, back out through this same magical door.
The Egyptians dug a shaft sometimes hundreds of feet long that connected to the final chamber.
We're in the burial chamber now. This is the granite sarcophagus. Inside of this would have been a wooden sarcophagus, and inside of that would have been placed the body of the tomb owner. All of this then would have been buried underground. The hieroglyphs and images in the burial chamber describe the life that the tomb owner wanted to live in the afterlife. Included in the burial chamber would have been items that the deceased person would hope to use in the next life, treasures that they would take with them to the afterlife.
The enormous treasures became easy targets for grave robbers. So tomb builders created a barricade to protect these riches by backfilling the passages to the burial chamber.
So the first thing a thief encountered when he found the tomb site was sometimes 300 yards of solid stone rubble that he had to dig through to get into the tomb proper.
Over the centuries, the interiors of tombs became increasingly elaborate, with the intention of confusing tomb raiders.
Often Egyptian tombs were designed specifically to hide the mummy, to keep the mummy secret. So one of the manners was to use false passages, false doors, false chambers, etc., so that people would be lost, in effect, kind of in a maze often.
However, this did little to deter grave robbing. Thieves often desecrated the mummies and their tombs to steal the riches that were meant for the afterlife.
The effect of the plundering of the tomb over the centuries was that an untold number of ancient riches have been lost or dispersed.
A threat greater than grave robbing was yet to come. In 525 BC, the Persians conquered Egypt, followed by the Greeks and the Romans. The invaders were fascinated by mummification and allowed the practice to continue. But later in 642 AD, the Arabs occupied Egypt and Islam became the dominant religion. Mummification was not tolerated and came to an end.
And then it became a lost art. Egypt was eventually invaded by the Arabs, becomes a Muslim country, and in a sense is cut off from the Christian West. So throughout the Middle Ages, throughout the Renaissance, we've lost touch with Egypt, and that art of mummification is gone. So sands come in, whole temples are lost, tombs are buried under sand, and it simply remains there, waiting for archaeologists to discover it.
With the advance of another conquering superpower, Egypt's mummies would be rediscovered. In 1798, Napoleon invaded Egypt and took scientists with him to document Egyptian culture.
And they really do the first archaeological survey of Egypt. And this is how the West really learns about Egypt for the first time. When they start publishing their drawings and their paintings, and people see for the first time accurate depictions of mummies, this is when Europe goes wild with Egyptomania.
In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Egyptian mummies became historical treasures, sought after by museums worldwide.
Once people realize how important mummies are, that they're part of history, then they start being displayed in museums, being taken care of, and then that leads to studying them.
During the 1900s, archaeologists combed Egyptian burial sites for these links to the past. One of the most important discoveries was the tomb of King Tut. But there was more than treasure here. There was a curse and a murder mystery. King Tutankhamun, or as he is best known, King Tut, is probably the most famous mummy in the world. The pharaoh is not only celebrated for the enormous riches discovered in his tomb, but also for the mysteries surrounding his life and death. Today's technology has attempted to uncover some of the answers to this legendary intrigue. Fascination has surrounded Tut since British archaeologist Howard Carter first discovered him in 1922.
When he discovered the tomb and actually began to publicize these finds, this news galloped around the world. I mean, front page news in New York and in Sydney and in Cairo and Paris were all talking about this sensational find. It really was Tutmania.
In the beginning, Tutmania was motivated by the stores of riches found in his tomb.
There were over 5,000 objects put into this very small tomb with King Tut. There's gold, there's alabaster, there's ivory, jewelry and precious stones that still dazzle your eye. And one of the most remarkable things is how well preserved they all are, as though they were made yesterday.
One of the most celebrated relics on Earth was the gold burial mask that was placed on Tut's face.
This particular death mask is one of the most spectacular objects ever found in anywhere, and from any culture. Made of gold and a variety of other metals, including silver, but also with stones such as onyx, turquoise, obsidian, a variety of different elements put together to make an absolutely gorgeous death mask.
In a short time, supernatural mystery would accompany this sublime treasure. Legend has it that those who entered the tomb became ill and died shortly thereafter.
The first individual to die that started the legend of the Curse of the Mummy was Lord Carnarvon. He was the man who financed Carter's digs. He died about 2 months after Carter opened the chamber that had the mummy in it. And so the legend was born, and then over time, anybody who was associated with the project who died suddenly was ascribed to be a victim of the mummy's curse.
For decades, the myth endured. Hollywood even cashed in on the curse.
I think the mummy, as a horror figure, really becomes prominent after the discovery of King Tut's tomb. There was all this talk about the curse of King Tut, and then you get the idea of mummies as things that kill people. So I think it's really after Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered.
The curse may have struck gold at the box office, but science has some far different theories about what might cause death to those who enter tombs.
There apparently are some very real scientific reasons that are surfacing now. Most archaeologists these days who open sealed tombs in ancient Egypt actually let the tombs breathe, so to speak, for a few days, because there may well be buildups of toxic gases, other toxic materials. These are chambers that have been sealed for countless generations. They have decomposing bodies in them, foodstuffs, the resins and the other chemicals that were made and used during the mummification process. All of that can contribute to a pretty risky environment, so archaeologists actually let the tombs breathe before they go in.
So perhaps science has solved the mystery of the curse of King Tut. Likewise, science has been put to use to solve another enduring King Tut mystery: a royal murder.
The mystery of King Tut's death began at the time that he was found. because they discovered that he was a youth, and we needed to find out exactly how he died. Did he die a natural death? Was he murdered? Was he killed?
The Boy King ruled ancient Egypt about 3,500 years ago, after inheriting the throne from his father at the tender age of 9. 10 years later, his reign was cut short.
And there were a number of contenders for the throne, so it's certainly within the realm of possibility. We know that there were other assassinations in Egyptian history of pharaohs, so it would certainly be possible that Tutankhamun could have been murdered.
In an effort to solve the mystery, Tut's mummy was X-rayed in 1968, which revealed an intriguing hole in the back of his head.
The idea that Tut might have died in a palace coup really took hold after the X-ray of the mummy revealed a chip of bone driven up into the back of his head. He might have been bludgeoned.
In 2005, Tut's remains underwent a CT scan, which produced detailed cross-section images.
The discovery in the CAT scan about the hole in the back of the head indicated that it was part of the mummification process. In fact, in the 18th dynasty, many of the mummies had holes in the back of the head they've discovered when they do these CAT scans.
So what caused the Boy King to die so young? The CT scan may have also revealed the real cause of Tut's demise.
The latest discoveries with CT scanning seem to have suggested that there was perhaps a fracture in his leg, and that perhaps an infection that set in later could have killed him. We know that even a toothache, the cavity, could eventually lead to someone's death. And in fact, some of the pharaohs seem to have died from infected teeth.
This new evidence has essentially ended the investigation into Tut's murder.
The case for murder is closed. 100% of the population of Egyptologists believe he was not murdered.
In addition to finding the cause of King Tut's death, technology has also given us clues as to what he looked like. Using facial reconstruction, much like law enforcement uses today to help solve murder cases, scientists have created a lifelike model of the Egyptian king. The CT scan images were used to construct a plastic model of Tut's skull. Then, using clay, a sculptor molded layers of musculature and skin. An artist fleshed out details: eyebrow thickness, nose, lips, and the approximate shape of Tut's ears. Finally, glass eyes, hair, and even historically accurate makeup completed the reconstruction. This is believed to be what King Tut actually looked like.
I think because of the technology that underlies this reconstruction, it's as close as anybody is going to get to what Tut looked like in life.
However, the study of the Boy King's remains may be far from over. Can technology reveal even more?
The fascination of Tut endures, and I think as new technologies evolve, he will be a natural subject to apply those new technologies and unlock pieces of the story we can't even guess at yet.
King Tut has always received the finest care and scientific study. But for centuries, countless mummies were desecrated, stolen, or simply lost and forgotten. Had the ancient Egyptians known the degree of shocking desecration to which their mummies would be subject, they might have thought twice about embalming them for eternity.
Through the ages, mummies have been used for all kinds of things. People believed that ground-up mummy itself could give you immortality. So apothecaries in Europe, pharmacists, started grinding up mummies and using it as a medical ingredient to help the sick. During the Civil War, there was a shortage of paper. So the linen from mummies, the mummy bandages, were shipped over to America and pulped and made into paper for various industries.
19th century aristocrats entertained themselves by buying mummies and holding what were called observation sessions for public audiences.
people would unwrap them, and they'd want to see what's inside the bandages, or they'd certainly want to see what the face looked like. And really, we've lost a lot of knowledge and information about that. I mean, I think if any poor ancient Egyptian knew what was going to happen to his mummy that way, I think he'd be very unhappy about it.
This poor fellow may have been the guest of honor, purchased for an unwrapping party, held in a private home.
It's very probable that this mummy was unwrapped during Victorian times as part of one of those parlor games where they would just unwrap the linens to see what amulets or jewels or treasures would fall off of the mummy's body. They were fascinated with what they might find. It was a treasure hunt. It was a lot easier than going to Egypt and digging through the sand. They could simply unwrap these linens and see what would fall out, and then it belonged to them.
Mummies were bought and sold like any other commodity. Many were lost over time. In 1860, a collection of mummies was purchased by a museum in Niagara Falls. No one knew that in that collection rested one of the most powerful men ever to walk the banks of the Nile.
The Niagara Falls Museum was really less of a true museum than a kind of sideshow where it had two-headed animals and the barrels people went over the falls in and kind of bizarre things like that.
But one mummy in this collection of oddities seemed to stand out.
As a 7-year-old or 8-year-old boy, I went to the museum and saw this mummy and stood face to face, if you will, with this ancient person. The first thing that made people look at this was the pose of the mummy and the obvious high quality of the process.
The real tip-off was that the position of the arms was crossed over the chest. This was a posture reserved only for pharaohs.
For more than 100 years, this mummy entertained the masses, until the Niagara Falls Museum closed in 1998. Its mummies were sold to the Michael C. Carlos Museum at Emory University in Atlanta. There, the mysterious cross-armed body finally received the high-tech attention needed for a thorough background check.
So once it got here, we began consulting with experts from all over the world.
However, the pharaoh connection couldn't be established with DNA, since Egyptian authorities were reluctant to give samples from their royal mummies. Instead, non-invasive CT scans and X-rays were compared to other known ancient pharaohs. Just who was this mummy? Stunningly, one candidate stood out: Ramses I.
The style of the wrappings matched other important royal mummies, most closely that of Seti I and Ramses II, son and grandson of the missing mummy of Ramses I. The CT scan was very useful because it revealed inside the mummy two very tightly coiled pieces of linen in the body cavity, used as filling to help sort of plump out the body once the internal organs were removed. This is paralleled only by the mummy of Seti I, the son of Ramses I. So that seemed to clinch father and son together. We came to the conclusion that it by far was most likely the mummy of Ramses I.
The discovery of Ramses I filled a long-standing gap in the historical lineage of Egyptian pharaohs. In order for the great king to take his place with other royal mummies, the Carlos Museum voluntarily sent him back to Egypt, where he received a regal reception.
Without this technology, we never would have been able to make that determination. Being the mummy of Ramses I, giving it back its identity.
Just as scientists use technology to give Ramses his name and his honor, other scientists use technology to preserve and protect legions of unnamed mummies, who are at risk of literally crumbling to dust. Locked away in sealed tombs, mummies have survived for thousands of years. But now that they're out in the modern world, how will they fare?
Restoring and preserving mummies is kind of in its infancy.
The biggest challenge that we face with the mummies is that the linens and the bodies themselves have become fragile and brittle and often broken over time.
Preservationists use a sheer nylon material to help keep mummies from literally falling to pieces. This newly developed technique holds the bandages and body parts together.
This mummy has been prepared for display in the galleries by first carefully arranging the wrappings that are on the mummy and then covering the whole mummy with a sheer fabric that matches the color of the old linen and allows you to see through it, enabling you to see the wrappings as they were originally arranged, somewhat as a hairnet does. It allows those loose and now very brittle linens to stay in place around the mummy as it lies on display.
The natron, or salt compound that was used by the Egyptians to preserve mummies, today may cause a mummy to actually disintegrate.
And if there are any changes in temperature and humidity, the salt that is naturally dissolved in the material will redissolve and migrate in or out, depending on if the air is drier or wetter than the object. And the movement of this salt back and forth actually erodes the surface. It actually causes things to explode from the inside out.
To control this problem, a specially designed computerized system at the Carlos Museum regulates temperature and humidity.
The museum is kept at very specific environmental conditions, and in order to accomplish that, we use environmental controls through an air conditioning system that are set to maintain temperature at about 70 degrees, plus or minus 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we set the relative humidity around 50%, plus or minus 5% RH.
Tiny organic microbes can also wreak havoc on a mummy. At the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, a common intruder was found resting alongside kings and queens.
It was discovered that the mummies in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo were growing mold. They were literally getting moldy.
Everyday household mold and fungus can destroy the most revered pharaoh.
If mummy is not protected, mummy could be disintegrated in a matter of a couple of years.
Shin Maikawa is a senior scientist at the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles, California. He was asked by the Cairo Museum to help solve the problem of the moldy mummies.
Three things affecting mummies are temperature, relative humidity, and oxygen.
Oxygen is one of the largest contributors to the breakdown of organic material because it provides the fuel that allows microbes, like mold and fungi, to breed and multiply. To attack the problem, Maikawa designed an oxygen-free display case. This is a small prototype of the custom-built case.
The goal of display case is to provide stable, dry environment for mummy without oxygen, so that we can eliminate both stress from humidity variation and possibility of fungi attack.
To create an environment good for mummies and bad for microbes, 3 additional materials are needed. A compound of essentially powdered iron absorbs oxygen in the air, while activated charcoal granules filter out impurities and pollutants. And silicon gel caplets help control the humidity or moisture. They're all placed inside the display case. Then the case is sealed, airtight. Now the environment of the case is made inhospitable to microbes. As oxygen is removed, and pure nitrogen is pumped in.
Nothing live can possibly survive in nitrogen. So once you put a mummy in there, in an atmosphere of nitrogen, no fungus, no bacteria, no molds, it'll be preserved just perfectly.
The Egyptian Museum has now placed their royal mummies in Maikawa's specially designed cases. And the common mold problem has been vanquished.
Display case is very easy to build, very inexpensive, and we can keep the mummy forever.
And after all, forever was the goal of the ancient Egyptians in the first place. They believed that speaking the names of the dead and visiting their remains would give the deceased an eternal afterlife. Today, with the public intensely interested in mummies, it appears they may have succeeded.
Start the scan.
Computer tomography scanning, known as CT or CAT scanning, explores inside a human body and is a life-saving tool for diagnosing disease. But in this case, the patient is dead.
In fact, dead for 5,000 years. But hopefully the CT scan will tell us why he died and what conditions may have led to his death.
This mummy from the Michael C. Carlos Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, is examined without being unwrapped to uncover the secrets inside.
Looks like there's some tissue there.
Wow. Oh, that's really interesting.
CT scanning is based on the X-ray principle. As X-rays pass through the body, they're absorbed at differing levels, creating a flat image on film. In the case of the CT, the X-rays are fired from various angles around the subject to create a cross-section, or slice. As the patient moves through the scanner, up to 1,500 slices are produced and stacked together, like a deck of cards, to form a comprehensive picture of the body.
Technology has really revolutionized both the study of mummies and dealing with them in museums, because it helps us not only understand how they were made, but it helps us preserve them for future generations.
Across the country at the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum in San Jose, California, a curiously tiny mummy has been on display for more than 75 years.
The mystery of this small mummy is a story of who this was, how this person lived, and how this person died. And given that this is a small mummy, the assumption was a child.
To unlock the mystery beneath the bandages, Dr. Amy Ladd, along with a team of scanning and computer experts, performed one of the most sophisticated high-tech medical exams ever carried out on an Egyptian mummy.
This technology is fascinating. It's like doing a virtual autopsy without touching the mummy at all.
The type of scanner used on a mummy is called a C-arm. It's a movable arm that completely encircles the subject. The C-arm produces an astounding 60,000 image slices, which deliver details rarely before seen in a mummy scan.
This is breakthrough technology. Humans cannot even go through the scanner right now. It's that new.
The thousands of images from the scanner were then fed into a supercomputer to create a virtual three-dimensional image inside the mummy.
It's a fantastic thing because it's preserved in its original state. And as we found out, it is preserved so well that we can see details as if it were a child ever seeing in the clinic today.
With these astounding images, Dr. Ladd was able to solve the mystery of the tiny mummy. First, by examining the 3,000-year-old teeth.
This is the mummy scan of the jaw. This is from the side. You see the lower jaw, baby teeth, which are already in place, and the teeth that haven't come in yet, that are beginning to form, including the 6-year molars. This tells us the age because there's baby teeth still in place, so we know it's a young child, hasn't lost any teeth. The 6-year molars haven't come in yet, which tells us that this child is younger than 6.
Details from under the wrappings also revealed clues about the sex of the child.
So this image of the mummy's skull, the child's skull, we know it's a girl because on the skull there is a wavy pattern which is the preservation of the child's hair. And at that time, a girl had hair and a boy had his head shaved. We also know it's a girl because there is no mummified genitalia between the legs, which by default that's a girl and not a boy.
The scanning images were even able to tell the story of how the little girl may have died.
There's a suggestion of there's some scalloping out, these kind of grayish areas, which possibly means there was increased intracranial pressure, meaning this child may have had a virus or a bacteria infection causing swelling in the brain, which may have been the cause of death.
So it was really a tragedy. Here was this healthy child, probably running around till just a few weeks before her death. And what an abrupt ending. This is a kid who had a whole life to live, which wasn't. And it's preserved in time, and that's been a wonderful experience unraveling that mystery.
Our high tech may help us understand the past. But how did the Egyptians use their technology to accomplish some of the most amazing body preservation the world has ever known?
The Egyptians were the techies of their day. They had skills that nobody else had.
Dr. Robert Breyer, a renowned Egyptologist, is considered by many to be the world's foremost expert on mummies and the mummification process. In fact,
people sometimes call me Mr. Mummy. I never call myself that. But I think it's that they're surprised that there's anybody who would work with just mummies.
Dr. Breyer is so fascinated by mummies, he wanted to accomplish what no one else had in thousands of years. In 1994, he performed and documented an actual body mummification, using the same process as the ancient Egyptians.
I decided to mummify a human cadaver because I wanted to know exactly how the Egyptians mummified their dead.
Without the use of modern medical technology, Dr. Breyer set out to mummify a body using the exact tools available to the Egyptians millennia ago.
In order to do the project, we had to replicate Egyptian tools. Now, they had knives made out of bronze and copper, but they also had obsidian, which is volcanic glass, and that's very sharp, even sharper than surgical scalpels. So they used that for incisions too.
Using a cadaver donated to science, Dr. Breyer began his first step in the Egyptian mummification process, removing the internal organs, which are prone to rapid decay.
In order to preserve a body, you have to make sure that bacteria don't act on it. Bacteria is what causes decay. They act on the soft tissue. And the reason they go to the soft tissue is there's water there. So the key is dehydrate quickly, get rid of the moisture so the bacteria won't decay your body. Now this tool was really important. They removed the internal organs through a tiny incision, only 3.5 inches wide. So you can't get your full hands, you can't get 2 hands in. So this tool, when you've got your incision made, you can put it in the incision and kind of pull the organs out.
The Egyptians made such small incisions because they wanted to cause bodies as little damage as possible. Ancient embalmers removed all the internal organs, from the stomach and lungs to the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder. The only organ left was the heart.
They left the heart in place because they believed you thought with your heart. They didn't realize you thought with your brain. So they left the heart in place because you're going to need that to do your thinking when you get to the next world.
Once the organs were removed, the Egyptians stored them and buried them with the mummy in containers called canopic jars.
It's really a jar. It's got a lid. It's hollow inside. And the lid is in the shape of a god who protects the...